Hi there, this is Heather of Shutterbug 101. Today we'll be discussing the Canon 90D and the kit lens, the 18-135. Let's get started. The Canon 90D is a 33 megapixel crop sensor DSLR camera with 45 focus points and a fully articulating touch LCD screen. This camera has a continuous drive at 11 frames per second, shoots video in 4K up to 30 frames or 1080p HD video up to 120 frames for slow motion video, has a microphone port and a headphone port. The 90D also has Wi-Fi abilities to transfer images from the camera to your smart device, is environmentally sealed, and is Canon's high-end crop sensor camera that is sure to give you some great results. Today we'll be discussing the doors, buttons, and menus to help you navigate this camera a little easier. Okay, so getting started on the 90D, we're going to go ahead and discuss the lens first. So as you can see, we have a couple of switches on this lens. The 18-135 is a pretty great starter lens because it gives you such a wide range. What is also great about this lens is if you look at the contacts on the bottom, you can actually get a separate mounting piece specifically to control this and make it a digital zoom, which is really great if you want to do video on this camera or any Canon camera, really, as long as you get that piece. It just makes the zoom go much smoother than kind of like with what we can do with our hand here. It would essentially put a motor on this so it would electronically zoom and make it much smoother, which is really neat. We have our autofocus manual focus switch. We have our autofocus manual focus switch, which of course AF for autofocus, you're going to push your shutter button halfway down, it's going to focus for you. MF is going to be manual focus, where you would use this front ring here to dial and focus yourself. We have the stabilizer. So stabilizer, of course, is meant for when you are hand holding the camera and it's kind of making up for your body shake or when you're breathing. If you have this on a tripod, that's when you want to turn that off. Just because at that point the tripod is now doing the stabilizing and you no longer need the stabilizer on. It can actually cause shake in your photo if it's anticipating it. And then of course we have our lock button here. So what the lock button is for is if we did that, I'm not going to be able to zoom the lens anymore. So if I put that back, now I can zoom the lens, no problem. And what that's for is if you're walking with the camera face straight down and gravity kind of takes its toll and the barrel slowly starts to slide out, over time this can kind of get looser and looser the more that you zoom it. So having that lock button on keeps it from coming out once it gets to that point. On the front of the camera here, we do have our lens release button. So you click and hold and turn, comes right off. You want to match up the white square or the red dot, if your lens has a red dot, to its correct symbol there, and turn and click. Very easy there. The other button is a little hidden. It's actually going to be right here near the bottom of the camera. This is going to be your preview button, which kind of gives you a little bit of preview to how the picture is going to come out through your viewfinder, which is interesting. You also see in the front of the camera here we have our little lightning bolt, which is going to give us access to pop the flash there. If we don't want it, we push it back down. We also have a little LED light here, which is going to be for focus assist, which in a situation where it may be too dark or there's not enough detail, it may shine this light out to help it focus. And then right here is where we actually have our infrared sensor. So if we wanted to use a wireless remote control, you have the ability to do that with this sensor right here. And then of course this would be your shutter button. You push halfway down to focus, push all the way down to take a picture. Getting to the side of the camera here, we have our card door. So if we slide out, that'll pop right open. And it does give you a symbol there of which direction the card goes into the camera. So you'll see that it'll go in with the cutoff corner facing this direction. And it is spring loaded, so you just push it in or push it again to be able to take that out. On this side, we do have some doors here. So this door here is going to be for HDMI and USB. So HDMI is going to be for connecting it to a television screen or your computer screen. It's essentially just, allowing you to show what is on the rear display on a larger display. You have your USB cable here, which is going to be able to connect it to a computer to either transfer images or update firmware as that comes along. In this door here, we have our mic and headphone port, which of course does say mic and does show a picture of some headphones. In this door we have our remote control port. So if you didn't want to use the infrared sensor in the front of the camera and you wanted a wired shutter release, that's where you're going to plug it in there. Which of course is what I used for the sample pictures, just so you know. At the bottom of the camera here we have our universal screw mount to screw into a tripod plate. And then we have our door for our battery, which again, on the door here, it does show you what direction to put the battery in. And then to take it out, you just hit this little switch here and it pops right out. On the top of the camera here, we do have quite a few buttons, as you can see. So we're going to start right here. This is going to be our on and off switch, pretty simple there. And we have our mode dial. The green A, of course, is going to be your automatic mode. So even though this is their higher end crop sensor, it does still have an automatic mode to it. There's no shame in using auto mode, especially if you're brand new to this camera or Canon in general. While you get used to all the buttons and features of this camera, it's nice to keep it in auto, so at least, it helps you to be able to learn everything else first before moving on to anything else. But it's essentially letting the camera take full control of your settings. Anywhere from light intake to how much time it's letting light in, and so on. We have the P mode, which is going to be your program mode. This is going to be automatic, but it's going to give you access to changing certain settings like your metering or your focusing or any of those things, which I do have individual videos on going over those in detail of when you would use those and why you would use those. You can go ahead and check out my playlist at the end of the video here of my tips and tricks videos. We have our TV mode, which is going to be time value for Canon. Usually on other cameras it's shutter speed, but it's controlling the same thing. They just decided to do it TV instead of S. This is going to control how much time you let light into the camera for capturing motion. So you can freeze motion or cause a blur. So with my pictures, with my sample pictures using the sparklers, we actually used the TV mode because naturally I wanted to capture the sparkler in motion. So something to keep in mind there. The AV mode is control how much light you let into the camera. So this is a way to get that nice blurry background, which you're seeing with the lens here, and sharp foreground, which is the top of the camera here, by adjusting the aperture. You can also use this to help yourself in low light situations to let more light in, or even to give yourself that starburst effect of the sun coming through the trees by closing it up real small. But either way, if you're on TV, the camera decides the aperture. If you're on the aperture mode, the camera if you're on the aperture mode, the camera decides the shutter speed for you. And then of course you have your manual mode, which is going to be all you. The camera's only doing what you tell it to, so naturally you're going to want to know your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO, all of your settings before you get started on manual. And you may find that you don't use it very much, and that's okay too. We have B for bulb. This would be for extremely long exposures. I didn't have to use this for my pictures. I mainly did maybe 4-second exposures. But bulb would be more for Milky Way photography. If you wanted to do timed exposures of maybe amusement park rides, something like that, then you have the access to bulb right there on the dial. You have your C1 and C2 button. These are going to be custom buttons where, say, for example, you were taking pictures in a studio setting, something with constant lighting that never changes, and you found the perfect setting to take pictures in that situation. You could save it to one of these. So if you ever leave with your camera, go outside, go photograph at the park, or at your friend's birthday party or whatever it is, and then you come back and want to take pictures in the same lit setting, you just have to scroll back to one of these after you've saved it, which is really nice. So this guy here is going to be your creative filters mode. So you can go ahead and choose a filter. So you have grainy black and white, soft focus, fisheye effect, water painting, toy camera, different HDR options. So it's just kind of different effects that you can give to your photos. Now naturally these are only going to work if you're taking pictures in JPEG, so that's something to keep in mind. RAW will not save the way that you're seeing it on the screen. And then you have your scene mode, which is the last mode up here before we get back into our auto mode. You can choose your scene. These are essentially auto. The scene is essentially auto. You're just telling the camera, hey, narrow it down to this sort of situation instead of giving it a broad, you decide for me. So you're telling the camera, hey, pick my settings, but just know I'm taking a picture of a person. So it's portrait or a group photo or a landscape or sports. And there's all sorts of different options to play with, and you can play with the pre-settings here or try it on, you know, your different manual modes and kind of see what comes out better, which is, you know, kind of the nice thing about a camera like this. It gives you the creativity, it gives you the freedom and the options to do what you want, which is kind of nice. For the rest of the video, I'm going to stay on the P mode because you'll find that a lot of menus do not pop up in the auto mode. So if you're following along and you're like, hey, wait a minute, I'm not seeing that, make sure you're in your P mode for that. Here we have our hot shoe. This is going to be for mounting an external flash because naturally these pop-up flashes are not the best, unfortunately. They do the job if you need it to, but when it comes to getting great lighting and making it look natural and not blinding the person you're taking a picture of, it's important that you get an external flash with a diffuser. Over here in these buttons, we do have some controls here. So on this screen we have like our exposure, we have our aperture, we have our shutter speed, we have our set ISO, the battery level, our metering mode, our drive mode, and our focus. So to change these, here we have our autofocus to change. So if you hold this, click this button here, and then use this to change it around. You can see it also changes it on the back screen. One shot is going to be autofocus single. That's where it's going to focus on a single subject and lock on. So if someone's posing, if it's a landscape, something like that, one shot is a great one to be on. We have AI servo, which is going to be for continuous autofocus for sports or wildlife. And then we have AI focus, which is going to be autofocus auto. You're letting the camera determine between whether it's something still or something moving. So depending on the situation you're in, you'll change it accordingly. Our drive mode, the single square, is going to mean that when I click and hold this button down, it's going to take one picture. We have multiple frames with the H. That's going to be continuous high. That's at 11 frames per second. We have our low speed continuous, which is just the regular frames there, which I believe you can set in the camera. I believe the default is probably something like 6 frames per second. You have silent single shooting, so it does have like a silent mode. It's not completely quiet because naturally the mirror still has to kind of kick up. Then we have silent continuous. We have our remote control, which is going to mainly be for the infrared sensor. We have our timer with a 3-second remote, and then a self timer continuous. Then we have our ISO, which is going to be our sensitivity to light. So the ones in the pool I actually did at 3200, but the ones I did with the sparkler I kept at 100 because I wanted to keep it nice and sharp. If you're just starting to learn about your shutter speed, aperture, ISO, I would just keep your ISO into auto and set it to a limitation in the menu to where the camera can choose between this aperture and all the way up to this aperture. And for this camera, if you're shooting it on auto, I would set it to between 100 and 3200 just to kind of be in that safe zone. And what that essentially means is a lower ISO number is going to be for brighter days, sharper picture, while a longer exposure is going to mean you get a faster shutter in low light conditions if you can't let enough light in through the lens. It's, you know, it's a lot to consider. The shutter speed and the aperture are much easier to understand than the ISO, especially at first. I will in the future, I do have it planned to do an ISO video, so keep an eye out for that. We have our metering mode here, which if we click that button and we scroll here, this one here is going to be your evaluative metering. It's considering lighting from the entire area and finding a balance. We have partial metering, which is going to be center weighted. Partial metering, which is going to be more of a zone area, where it's not going to be as specific, but it's going to consider more of an area than the entire picture. You have your spot metering, which is going to be extremely specific, you know, someone's face, the middle of a flower for you to meter on. And then we have center weighted, which is just going to be the blank one there, which is going to take whatever's in the center and it's going to make that the priority for lighting. We also have a little light bulb here to make this screen light up in dark circumstances. I definitely found this very helpful when shooting the sample pictures for this video. Of course, with this knob here that we've been playing with, this is going to be our adjustments to make adjustments either to shutter speed, aperture, any of these settings here. It's just going to allow you to change those. This button here is going to be our autofocus area. This one here makes it a little bit easier to see exactly what we're doing. So you have auto selection autofocus, which is using all 45 focus points, I think I said it was, to be able to change it. We have large zone, so it's just focusing on either the middle zone, the left zone, or the right zone. We have manual zone autofocus select, so you can kind of move that little square around, makes it more specific. We have our 1-point autofocus, which allows you to focus on someone's eye, someone's nose, you know, the bird in a tree, that sort of thing. So you can be very specific of where you want to focus. And then you have spot autofocus, which is actually going to be very similar. I think it may bridge out a little bit more than that guy there. Going to the back of the camera here, you'll see that we do have a little wheel here. This is going to be our diopter for our viewfinder. So you'll find that a lot of people have different eyes. That's why you wear glasses, you know, because your sight is different from the norm. So what you can do is you can adjust this wheel to make it clear for you in the viewfinder, and once you have it set, you shouldn't have to change it again, fortunately. We have our menu button, which we'll go over last. Our info button is going to change how we see the screen here. So info button is going to give you this option here where we're seeing all this information here, which we'll go over here in a moment. Blank or a level to make sure that it is straight. We do have our photography mode and our video mode option here. The start stop on the camera mode is going to allow it to go into live view, so you can actually use the screen itself in order to take a picture. And then you can just stop it if you don't want it to. The video mode is automatically going to go into a live mode, and the start stop refers to recording. So you're going to push to start recording, push again to stop recording. Fairly simple. You have your autofocus, you have your rear autofocus button here, which allows you to back button focus. We have zooming in and zooming out when we come to our play button here. So if we look back at pictures on the card, we can then zoom in to make sure that everything's clear, or zoom out. We do have our little joystick here to move our focus points and all those type of things. Our quick menu. So this is something that you're going to find extremely helpful. The quick menu is going to allow you to change all these things on the screen without having to go into the actual menu. So you have your ISO, like we can change on the top. We have your exposure compensation. So going to plus numbers 1, 2, 3, you're actually going to make it brighter versus -1, -2, -3. You're going to make the scene darker. This is your flash exposure compensation. Wouldn't worry too much about that. You have your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connection to connect to your smartphone. Custom controls, if you would like to customize your camera a little bit to how you want it to, if you want to add more shortcuts. You have like this is kind of an HDR setting where you can have the camera auto-correct on brightness and contrast, but personally I wouldn't worry about that, just keep that on auto. You have your white balance, you have your white balance correction. Wouldn't worry about that too much at the moment. The white balance here, however, you can play with on a regular basis if you would like, but you always want to make sure it goes back to AWB when you're done playing with it. AWB means auto white balance. The camera is essentially determining what is a true white. So, if it needs to add warmness or coolness to make it a more accurate color, then it will do so. Otherwise, you have settings where you can set it to sunny or fluorescence or shade or something like that, and it'll actually add a orange or blue tone, which can really kind of help you creatively if you want to play around with kind of a different color shade or something like that. But like I said, always make sure it's in AWB when you change locations, because then you end up with orange or blue people. We have our effects here, which is essentially just going to change the way that we see the color. I would keep it on auto. There's like vivid and black and white and whatnot, but I would keep that on auto. We have our autofocus operation, which we went over on the top as well. We went over our autofocus selection, which of course is also a button on the top, and metering, which is a button on the top, so is drive mode. And then of course we have your image quality, which I like to capture in RAW because I like to edit my photos. I like to have a little bit more control over the shadows and highlights versus JPEG, where there's very little that you can do. And of course you have your battery level. You can also get to the quick menu by pressing this one here. And then in this box here, you'll actually see how many pictures you have left on the card. I actually took the card out, so it's not going to say, but that's what it would typically show. Here we have another adjustment circle here, very similar to this guy here. So it's either going to change shutter speed, aperture, pretty much the same here. In manual mode, one of these will change the aperture, one of these will change the shutter speed, so just keep that in mind. You have your set button, kind of your enter or confirm button, your playback button to view pictures, the trash can to delete pictures, that may be blurry or that didn't come out quite right. And then of course you have your lock switch here, which should prevent you from changing any settings or anything while you're shooting on accident. And of course we have our articulating touch screen here, which is really neat to be able to get different angles and whatnot. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get into the menu. So you'll find that a lot of the things that are laid out on the outside of the camera for your ease of access are also going to be in the menu. So you may find that I'm going to skip over quite a bit in the menu because it'll be repetition, but also I'm going to skip over some things that may be a while to explain, and it's not going to reach a big enough customer base to really go over. So if I do skip over something or I don't go over something in enough detail, please let me know in the comments below. I will be happy to go over it with you and give you a better explanation if you do need some extra help. So starting in tab 1, the camera here, this is going to be our shooting menu for the photography portion. Okay, so again, you have image quality, your aspect ratio, 3:2 or 4:3 is going to be the most common, but it's essentially the way that the photo is cropped. You have your image review for when the picture pops up on the back of the screen here, how long you would like it to pop up for, or if you'd like it to pop up at all after you've taken the shot. Release shutter without card. I would disable that personally, because if you're anything like me, someone who's very forgetful, I tend to forget to put cards in my camera sometimes, and if I go out and I'm starting to take pictures, and it allows me to take pictures, my brain only assumes that there's a card inside, and then I go, okay, I'm gonna go look at it, and I press my playback button and it goes, haha, nope, I don't have a card in here. I didn't save anything you just took. So at least if you have this set to off and you go and you start to take a picture, it's gonna let you know, hey, there's no card in here. You better put a card in if you wanna save your pictures. So that's just kind of my advice. You have your lens aberration correction. I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's something that you can play with, but It's going to happen on so very few lenses, I feel like. I very rarely ever had to use this. But, you know, definitely look into it. You have your flash control for when you're using flash, exposure compensation, exposure compensation, which we've already gone over in our quick menu, your ISO speed setting. So this is where I said you could set a limit to it in automatic. So in the ISO speed range, I would set the maximum to like 3200. So if we adjust that, yeah, I would set the max to 3200. That's what I would set it to here if you're starting to kind of learn your stuff. Also in your auto range as well. Okay, we have auto lighting optimizer. Again, that's also in your quick menu. Highlight tone priority. Honestly, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Your white balance, also in your quick menu. Custom white balance. Color space, you always want to keep that at sRGB for printing purposes. Picture style, wouldn't worry about that. Long exposure noise reduction, if you're going to be editing your images or you're taking them in RAW, I personally would have this off. But if you're just shooting for, you know, some fun and you're doing JPEG and you want the camera to help you up as much as possible, go ahead and turn it on. You have your high ISO speed noise reduction. Up to you on how high you want to have that. I just kind of have it at the average. Dust delete data. You have live view shooting, which is enabled by hitting the start stop button. If you want to do multiple exposures or if you want to use HDR. Your interval timer, your anti-flicker shoot, you know, locking your mirror up. Not ones I would really worry about at the moment. Your autofocus assist beam firing, it's that LED light that I told you up at the front. And then like lens electronic manual focus, which I wouldn't worry about either. And lens electronic manual focus, which I wouldn't worry about at the moment. Then we have our playback menu, which is regarding to the pictures that we've already taken. So you can protect images, rotate images, erase images, do a creative filter after you've taken the picture. You can do raw image processing, so you can process raw images in the camera. You have red eye correction. You can create an album. You can do cropping, resizing, do a slideshow if you have this connected to a TV via HDMI. If you wanted to just set it to slideshow, so it went through them for you. Highlight alert if you want it to let you know, when areas are too bright. View from last scene, where you can just view it from the last photo looked at on the playback menu. It's all just kind of going to be preference there. We have our Wi-Fi menu to set up your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connection. GPS device settings if you wanted to set that up. The next one here is going to be our wrench menu. It's going to be our general settings. You can select a folder. You can do file numbering, auto rotate, so it automatically rotates the picture if you decide to take a vertical shot. Formatting your card. This is something that I go over in every video because I think it's very important to learn, because either you're going to find out how to do it on accident or you'll never know. Formatting your card means it's going to permanently erase everything on your card, all the data, back to how you purchased it. And the reason you would want to do that is because it actually keeps your card nice and healthy and running strong for a longer amount of time. When you just go through and you use the trash can button and just delete your pictures and then retake them over and over and over again through time, you'll find that because when you're using the trash can, it's just deleting the visible file and the data is still stored on the card. You'll find that it overwriting that data so many times without just permanently clearing it can actually cause corruption. It can cause your card to lock up. So it's really important that every now and then, you get back from your vacation, you make sure that you back up your pictures to your computer. I cannot stress that enough. Make sure your pictures are backed up to your computer before you go and format your card. Then once you make sure that they're safe on your computers, there's someplace safe where you can access them off your card. You'll go in, you'll format your card, it'll permanently erase everything on there and help you start fresh for your next trip or your next event or whatever you're taking pictures of. Unless you are the type to just buy a new card for every situation, that's fine too. But just know that that is what formatting your card means. You have auto power off if you would like it to turn off after so much time, your display brightness, screen off and on button, which you just put that remains on, your date and time zone, which definitely need to be adjusted on this camera, your language. You have your video system, touch control, if you want to enable or disable the beep when it focuses, headphone volume if you're using the headphones during video, your battery info, sensor cleaning, which is mainly just going to kind of shake the sensor a little bit, see if it can knock off any dust, if you're seeing spots in your images. You have your mode guide, your feature guide, viewfinder display. I mean, this is all just kind of custom stuff. Your custom shooting modes, if you want to save settings to those. Your if you want to clear all your camera settings, if your camera's doing something funny because maybe you switched something, you don't know what you switched, you can just clear all the camera settings and hopefully it should return back to normal. You have your copyright information, checking your firmware, all of those things. And then our second to last tab here is going to be going into like custom exposures and, actually going through and customizing these things. Personally, I would stay far away from these. I feel like it could probably, if you're just getting started with this camera, if you really don't know, don't have a handle on this camera quite yet, or even Canon in general, these may make you get lost, or you may change something that maybe you didn't want to change. So personally, I would just leave these alone. I know that they want to give you full accessibility to make your camera your own and fully customizable, but these to me seem just unnecessary, but that's just my opinion. And then the last tab here you have is your My Menu tab. Now, menus can be very easy to get lost in. So in a situation where maybe you don't have something on the outside of your camera that's in the menu that you do want to access on a regular basis, if that's the case, instead of digging through it through all of these tabs, you can just add it to the My Menu tab and you'll know it's in the green tab with the star on it every single time. So it just gives you an easy way to find it. Digital cameras these days, they're fully customizable. That way you can make it your own. You'll know where everything is, but that's kind of also the con too, is there's a lot you can do with it. Don't get overwhelmed. The biggest thing is that you enjoy this camera, that you take your time to learn what the buttons do and what they're for. And if you're shooting on automatic mode for a while, that's fine. That's going to be your learning mode for now, while you get used to just the handle of this camera. And then once you want to start learning your shutter speeds and your apertures, what makes your photo, that's when you're going to start diving into your P mode and so on. If you have any questions at all about this camera and using it, let me know in the comments below. If you want to see any tips and tricks videos, or if you have a camera that you would like me to specifically go over, also let me know. And until next time, keep your eye out for inspiration, Shutterbugs. Bye.